My husband caught me cheating, but didn't expect him to do this. All right, so here's the thing. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious. My husband Thomas and I have been together for 7 years, married for 5. We've got a little guy, Ethan, who's 5. Family life was normal, I guess. The kind of normal where you don't really stop and think about it because it just runs on autopilot. Thomas works as an architect. Solid job, good pay, the whole package, right? I work in marketing for a small tech firm. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. Life was routine. He'd go off to his office, and I'd head to mine. We'd meet back home at the end of the day, tag team dinner, bathe Ethan, get him to bed, then we'd be in bed ourselves. It was fine, or at least I thought it was. But 5 months ago, Thomas got this big promotion at work. And I mean, I was happy for him. Really, I was. It was the thing he'd been chasing, probably one of his biggest career goals. But along with that came longer hours and extra responsibilities. Suddenly, he was practically living at the office. I thought it would settle down after a bit, like maybe he was just trying to prove himself in the new role. But nope. If anything, it got worse. I'd wait up for him, thinking maybe we'd have a bit of time together when he got home. But he'd just drag himself in, barely managing a high before collapsing on the couch. Sometimes he wouldn't even make it to bed. He'd just crash right there in the living room, still wearing his work clothes, like some kind of overworked robot. At first I thought, okay, it's just a rough patch, he'll get over it. It's the adjustment period. But then weeks passed and then months. And the thing is, it wasn't just his attention that I was missing, if you get what I mean. I'd try to, initiate something in the bedroom, and he'd just look at me with this half-asleep expression and mumble something like, "I'm really tired. Maybe tomorrow?" Spoiler. Tomorrow never came. So yeah, I started feeling pretty rejected. And not just physically, but emotionally too. It was like he wasn't seeing me anymore, like I was just part of the routine he had to deal with when he wasn't at work. And man, that really started to mess with my head. I was just waiting for some kind of connection that wasn't happening. I didn't know what to do, and the more I thought about it, the more frustrated I got. Now, around this time, work started getting intense for me too. We had this big client we were trying to land, Simon. Simon ran a small financial consulting company. He was a big deal for us because if we got him to sign with us, it would have made a huge difference, like company-wide kind of deal. So I was under a lot of pressure to make it happen. My boss, ever the master of vague encouragement, told me I needed to go the extra mile with Simon. She even hinted that I should be a bit friendlier, more personal to help build his trust. Not saying I should cross any lines, but, just be approachable. That's corporate speak for do whatever it takes without technically breaking the rules. So I started spending more time with Simon, trying to make him feel valued, showing him that our company wasn't just another cold, faceless entity. Lunches, coffee breaks, long conversations about his needs and what we could do for him, all of that. I was doing what I was told, and I guess I was also pretty distracted by all the work stuff. The funny thing is, Simon was actually kinda nice to be around. He's 48, divorced, no kids. Not exactly what I'd call my type, but he had this easygoing personality, always cracking jokes and making light of things. And, well, he was easy to talk to, which felt like a massive relief compared to the silence I was getting at home. We'd go out for these lunches, and he'd ask about my day, listen to me vent about little things. He seemed interested, Like, actually interested. One lunch in particular stands out. I remember I was having one of those chaotic days. Ethan had been a handful that morning, and work was just relentless. And then I spilled water all over my shirt at the restaurant, just my luck. I laughed it off, but when I looked up, Simon was staring at me in a way that was different. Not like he was being creepy, but there was definitely something in his eyes that made me feel noticed. I know it sounds pathetic, but that look gave me a thrill I hadn't felt in months. Here was someone actually looking at me, really seeing me. I brushed it off at first, telling myself I was imagining things, that he was just being friendly. But I couldn't deny that it made me feel something, a spark that I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. After that, our conversations got a bit more personal. Nothing crazy, just him asking about my life, how things were going at home, that kind of stuff. I wasn't about to pour my heart out, but I'd drop hints here and there about how things weren't great between Thomas and me, and Simon would nod, listen, give me sympathetic looks. I think he picked up on my loneliness pretty quickly, and I guess part of me liked that he noticed. We started having more lunches together, sometimes dinners when it was convenient, and honestly, I started looking forward to these little escapes. I'd leave the office thinking, oh, I get to see Simon today. It was just easy. I didn't have to pretend to be happy or pretend that everything was fine. And yeah, I was enjoying the attention. I'm not proud to admit it, but there was something satisfying about knowing someone thought I was attractive, that someone wanted to hear about my day and actually cared. I hadn't felt that in a long time, and it was like this addictive little buzz that I couldn't get enough of. Looking back, I can see how it started slipping from just business to something else. But at the time, I didn't want to admit that. I told myself I was being friendly, that I was just doing my job. But deep down, I think I knew I was crossing a line, even if it wasn't physical. I was playing with fire, convincing myself it was harmless because we weren't doing anything wrong. I guess that's how it starts for everyone, right? You think it's all innocent, but the line just keeps moving. I wish I could say I stopped it there. I wish I could say that I took a step back and put my energy back into my marriage, or at least had a hard conversation with Thomas about how I felt. But I didn't. I let that spark with Simon grow, let myself get pulled into the attention, the thrill, because for once I felt noticed. So, yeah, the line I told myself I'd never cross? I crossed it, and I honestly didn't see it coming, which is stupid now that I think about it. But it just kind of happened. It was another one of those lunch meetings with Simon. By this point, we'd met a bunch of times, more than I needed to if I was being honest. But it wasn't about the deal anymore. It had turned into something I looked forward to, something that actually made me feel good. And I hadn't felt that in a while. I remember that day clearly. I was feeling especially down because I'd tried to talk to Thomas the night before, about us, and he was just zoned out the whole time. I even asked if he still found me attractive. He looked at me like I just asked him what 2 + 2 was and muttered something about being tired. It crushed me. Like, how do you explain that kind of feeling, that emptiness? Anyway, that's what I was carrying with me when I went to see Simon. I was frustrated and I guess looking for some sort of validation. So there I was, sitting across from him, venting a bit, not explicitly about Thomas, but close enough. And he's just listening. He wasn't zoning out or saying uh-huh while staring at his phone. He was there, fully engaged, laughing at my little jokes, nodding when I was annoyed about work stuff, just being there. And it felt good. At one point, I knocked over a glass of water on the table. Simon laughed, saying it must have been one of those days, and reached over to help me with the napkins. His hand brushed mine, and I froze. It was nothing, probably innocent, but I couldn't help but notice. I felt my face heat up, and I think he noticed too because his smile softened in this way that felt almost deliberate. Then he said, it's nice to talk to someone who actually listens. I didn't say anything, just nodded, feeling my stomach do this weird flip. The whole atmosphere around us changed in that moment. It was like all the background noise faded, and suddenly I was just aware of him, his eyes on me, and the quiet between us that felt way too intense for a public place. I knew I should have left right then, or at least changed the subject to something strictly business. But I didn't. Instead, we kept talking, and it was like this line that had been drawn between just business and something else started to blur more and more. Every time he laughed at something I said, I felt this little thrill, like he was giving me exactly what I'd been missing at home. And I didn't want it to stop. After lunch, we walked out together, and there was this awkward moment where we were both sort of lingering in the parking lot. Normally, we'd just say, "See you later," and go our separate ways, but this time, I don't know. Neither of us moved. We just stood there, this weird tension building up between us. Simon finally looked at me and said, "Do you want to come over for a coffee?" Just like that. I hesitated, thinking of every reason I should say no. I mean, I knew what it meant. Coffee was just the excuse, But instead of all the reasons to say no, all I could think was that I didn't want to go home to an empty house, to the same silence that had been driving me crazy for months. So, I said yes. I barely remembered the drive to his place. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I kept telling myself I was just going over for a cup of coffee, that I could leave anytime I wanted. But deep down, I think I knew exactly what I was doing. When we got to his place, everything just felt surreal, like I was outside myself, watching all of this happen. He poured me a coffee, we sat on the couch and we talked, but it wasn't casual anymore. Every word felt loaded, like we were both saying things we didn't mean, like we were just playing along until we weren't playing anymore. At some point, he moved closer just a little, but it was enough that I could feel his arm against mine. I looked over, and before I knew it, he was kissing me. I didn't pull back. I didn't stop him. I just let it happen. Because in that moment, it was like every frustration, every feeling of being ignored and invisible, all of it just melted away. We ended up in his bedroom, and it wasn't some wild, crazy scene like in the movies or anything. It was slower, like we were both just figuring it out as we went. And I remember feeling this mix of excitement and shame, like I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I didn't care enough to stop. All I could think was how alive I felt in that moment, like someone actually saw me for the first time in forever. When it was over, reality hit like a freight train. I lay there staring at the ceiling, this horrible sinking feeling building up in my stomach. I kept thinking, what have I done? But at the same time, I didn't want to go back to that empty house, to that quiet and that constant feeling of being invisible. I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and part of me was already dreading the consequences. But another part of me was relieved. I got up and dressed as quietly as I could. Simon was half asleep, and I didn't want to wake him. I just needed to get out of there, clear my head, figure out what the hell I was going to do next. As I slipped out the door, I checked my phone. 2 missed calls from Thomas. My heart sank. My mind went into overdrive, trying to come up with a reason, some excuse for why I hadn't answered. The drive home was a blur. I kept rehearsing what I'd say if Thomas asked me where I'd been, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. By the time I got home, I felt like I was walking into a trap, expecting him to be standing there, demanding answers. But he wasn't. He was asleep, just like always, completely oblivious. I went straight to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked different. Or maybe I just felt different. I splashed water on my face, trying to wash away the guilt that was already gnawing at me. But no amount of water was going to fix what I'd done. I'd crossed that line, and there was no going back. Lying in bed that night, I kept telling myself that it was a one-time thing, just a stupid, impulsive mistake. But in the back of my mind, I knew I was lying to myself. I knew I'd see Simon again. The next few days after that night with Simon were a blur. I tried to go back to normal, put my focus back on work, on my kid, on being the wife I thought I'd been this whole time. But it was like I was split in two. One part of me desperately wanted to forget that night ever happened, and the other part kept reliving it in my head, replaying every little detail like it was the best secret I'd ever had. I kept telling myself it was a one-time thing, just this dumb, impulsive slip-up, but I couldn't stop thinking about Simon. I'd look at my phone, half hoping he'd text, half hoping he wouldn't. And then one day, right around lunch, I got a message from him. Coffee again? Just 2 words. I stared at my phone, feeling my heart racing in a way that was honestly ridiculous for a coffee invite. But the thrill was there, like I was 18 again or something. Before I could talk myself out of it, I replied, "Sure." We met up at a little place on the other side of town where I knew I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. The second I walked in and saw him sitting there, smiling at me, that guilt I'd been wrestling with went quiet. I guess I just wanted to feel wanted. And sitting across from him, I felt like that part of me that was invisible at home had come back to life. We kept it light at first, just talking about random stuff. How work was going, how he was dealing with his own clients. But I could tell that we were both skirting around what had happened between us. There was this tension in the air that felt like it was pulling us together, even though we weren't saying anything about it. Eventually, he looked at me and said, "So, that other night, do you regret it?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just looked down at my coffee, stirring it for no reason. Part of me wanted to say yes, that I did regret it, but the truth was that I didn't. Not entirely. I felt bad, obviously, but the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel like I was worth paying attention to, I couldn't bring myself to say I wished it hadn't happened. "I don't know," I finally said, half hoping he'd just let it drop. But he didn't. Instead, he reached across the table and put his hand on mine, right there, in the middle of a crowded coffee shop. I remember glancing around, terrified someone would see us, but no one was looking. It was like we were invisible, just 2 people who'd been ignored for so long they didn't even care who noticed anymore. We sat there for a minute, just holding hands across the table, both of us pretending like this was totally normal, like there was nothing wrong with this little moment we were stealing. And then he leaned in and whispered, "Let's go somewhere else." I should have said no. I should have walked away right then and there, but I didn't. I followed him out of the cafe and we ended up back at his place. Everything that happened after that well, it was a mess of emotions. It was thrilling and terrible at the same time, and I knew, right then, that I'd let myself fall down a hole I couldn't climb out of. When I got home later that night, it felt like I was carrying a weight on my shoulders that I couldn't shake off. I wanted to walk into the house, see Thomas there, and feel something, some kind of connection, some warmth. But when I walked in, the house was just quiet. Thomas was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, not even looking up as I walked by. I tried to start a conversation with him, anything to get him to notice me, to pull me back from whatever I'd started. I asked him how work was going, how his new project was coming along. Just anything. He answered sure, but his responses were short, distracted, like he was barely registering that I was there. I couldn't help but think that he'd rather be back at the office, dealing with clients or planning layouts, than sitting there talking to me. And that's when it hit me, like this cold, heavy realization. I was alone in my own house. This wasn't just about him being busy or tired. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being a team. We'd become two people living under the same roof, doing our own things, just going through the motions without even realizing it. I went to bed that night feeling this weird mix of anger and guilt. Angry that he didn't seem to care. Guilty because I was doing exactly what I hated about him, giving my attention to someone else. But every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing Simon's face, kept hearing him tell me I was worth something. And that feeling was like a lifeline I couldn't let go of. A couple of days passed, and I told myself to stop seeing Simon, to end it before things got even more complicated. But it didn't take long before I was back in his office, going over paperwork, talking like nothing had happened, like we were just two colleagues doing their jobs. And then, just as we were wrapping up, he looked at me with that same intensity, like he could see right through all the walls I'd put up. "Are we going to pretend that this is just about work?" he asked, his voice low, almost challenging. I didn't have an answer for him. Instead, I felt this pull, stronger than before, and before I knew it, we were wrapped up in each other again. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to pull away and walk out. But I couldn't. I let myself get swept up in that feeling, that rush that made everything else fade into the background. Afterwards, we sat there in silence, both of us probably realizing we'd crossed into territory neither of us could come back from. Simon finally broke the silence, saying something about how he knew this couldn't last, that it was a ticking time bomb. But he didn't want to stop, and the truth was, neither did I. Leaving his office that day, I felt this strange mixture of dread and excitement. It was like I was living in two worlds, the one with my family, my husband and son, and the one with Simon, where I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. And I didn't know how to reconcile them. That evening, I tried to shake off everything, tried to act normal at home. I made dinner, helped Ethan with his homework, and did all the regular mom things. But I couldn't get Simon out of my head. I kept thinking about the next time I'd see him, about how I'd feel that rush all over again. And that scared me more than anything. The reality was, I was in deep. Deeper than I wanted to admit, and as much as I told myself I could stop anytime, I knew that wasn't true. So, after that day in Simon's office, things just got messy. It felt like I was balancing on this knife's edge, trying to keep things together at home while sneaking around with Simon whenever I could. I knew it was wrong, but every time I thought about ending it, I'd feel that pull again. It was like I was addicted to this secret, the rush of being with someone who actually seemed to want me around. But it was getting harder to hide. At first, Thomas was too busy with his own stuff to really notice when I'd come home late or seem a bit more distracted. But lately, he'd been making these small comments, asking if I was really working late or why I seemed so out of it. Nothing confrontational, just little jabs that made me feel like he was catching on, like he was testing the waters to see if I'd admit anything. I tried to shrug it off, act casual. But I guess I wasn't as smooth as I thought, because one Friday after a long lunch with Simon that ran way over, I got home to find Thomas already there. He was just sitting on the couch, not scrolling through his phone like he usually did, just sitting there, waiting for me. The look on his face was hard to read, but it wasn't good. I could tell that much. I felt my stomach twist, like something was wrong, but I didn't know what yet. I tried to brush it off, like, "Hey, you're home early," and went to put my stuff down, hoping he'd just leave it at that. But he didn't. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, calm in a way that somehow made everything worse. I sat down on the couch, trying to keep my face neutral, even though my heart was pounding like crazy. I didn't want to give anything away, didn't want to assume he knew. Maybe he just wanted to talk about the usual stuff, like our son or work stress. But something in his expression told me that wasn't it. "Where were you today?" he asked, looking right at me like he was daring me to lie. And that's when I knew he knew. I felt my face go red, but I managed to keep my voice steady, or at least tried to. "I was at work, like usual," I said, hating how fake I sounded. His eyes didn't leave mine. Really? Because I swung by your office around lunch. Thought we could grab a quick bite. But they told me you'd already left. So, where were you? My mind went blank. I hadn't expected that. Thomas showing up at my office? That wasn't like him at all. He'd never done that before. I could feel the walls closing in, every possible excuse I could think of just crumbling before I could even speak them out loud. I tried to stay calm, but my voice came out shaky. I went to meet a client. It was a last-minute thing. Nothing big. Thomas nodded, like he was considering it, but his face didn't soften at all. He leaned back on the couch, crossing his arms, still watching me. Funny, because I saw you. With him. My heart stopped. He saw us? I didn't know how much he'd seen, didn't know if he'd followed us or just happened to catch us somewhere. But it didn't matter. He knew, and there was no way to talk my way out of it. I just sat there, not knowing what to say, feeling like every word that came to mind was somehow making things worse. Thomas shook his head, letting out this long, shaky breath. How long? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I wanted to lie, to say it was just once or twice, that it didn't mean anything. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. A couple of months, I admitted, feeling the weight of those words settle in the room like a bomb that had just gone off. He didn't say anything right away. He just sat there, staring at me, like he was trying to see something in my face that would make it all make sense. I could see the hurt in his eyes, this kind of pain that was way worse than any anger he could have thrown at me, and that made it even harder to look at him. Finally, he spoke. Why? It was such a simple question, but I didn't know how to answer it. How do you explain something like that? How do you tell your husband that he made you feel invisible, that you were so desperate for attention you'd risk everything just to feel seen? I don't know, I stammered, knowing how pathetic that sounded. I guess I felt alone, like you weren't really there anymore, like I was just another part of the routine, something to be checked off the list. He let out a bitter laugh. So this is my fault because I work? Because I tried to give us a life where we didn't have to worry about money or stability? I shook my head, feeling the guilt piling up. No, it's not. It's not your fault. I don't know. I messed up. I know that. He got up from the couch, pacing back and forth, his hands on his head like he was trying to physically hold himself together. I thought we were okay. I mean, sure, we had issues, but I thought we'd get through it. I never thought you'd... He stopped himself like he couldn't even say the words. I could feel the weight of everything crashing down, like all those little choices I'd made, all those times I'd ignored that voice in my head telling me to stop, had finally come back to haunt me. I trusted you, he said quietly, almost to himself. I thought we were partners. Hearing him say that hurt in a way I can't even describe. I wanted to reach out, to say something that would make it all go away, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I'd broken something that couldn't be fixed with words. Is it over? He asked, looking at me again, and this time I could see the anger there simmering under the surface. Yes, I said immediately, because I knew it had to be. Even if I'd been fooling myself before, even if part of me had clung to the idea of Simon like some kind of escape, I knew it was done. It had to be. Thomas nodded, not saying anything, just processing, I guess. The silence between us felt heavy, like there were a million things we both wanted to say, but neither of us knew where to start. Finally, he just looked at me, his expression a mix of sadness and something else I couldn't quite place. Do you even want to fix this? He asked, and there was this vulnerability in his voice that broke my heart all over again. Yes, I whispered, barely able to get the word out. I do. I don't want to lose you. But the look on his face told me it wasn't that simple. Maybe it never would be. I'd shattered something between us, and I didn't know if there was any coming back from it. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded, almost like he was done, like he'd finally gotten the answers he needed, even if they were the last things he wanted to hear. Then, without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there, alone with the mess I'd made. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let things get so far, wondering if there was anything left to save. After our last talk, things went from bad to worse. Thomas didn't just want time apart. He wanted me out of the house. He said he couldn't stand to look at me anymore, that it was over for good, and that he'd already started the divorce process. But the worst part wasn't that he wanted a divorce. It was the condition he laid down in exchange for keeping things quiet. Thomas told me he'd fight for full custody of Ethan. He looked me dead in the eye and said that if I didn't agree to give up my rights, he'd tell Ethan about my affair, make sure our son grew up knowing exactly how I'd betrayed his father. Hearing him say that, knowing how serious he was, scared me more than anything. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't let Ethan grow up hating me, knowing I'd messed up this bad. So I agreed. I signed the papers, giving Thomas everything. Full custody, the house, my life. He didn't even let me have a chance to explain things to Ethan properly. He took it all. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, he called my sister Olivia. I don't know if he'd planned this, or if she'd volunteered herself. But the minute she came over, it was clear she'd chosen his side. Olivia didn't hold back. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like she'd never known me. She called me selfish, said I'd ruined my family, hurt everyone, and didn't deserve to be in Ethan's life. It was like she had a whole speech prepared, like she'd been waiting to unload on me. And the thing was, I couldn't even argue. I just stood there, taking it, feeling smaller and smaller with every word. After she'd finished, she turned to Thomas and asked him if there was anything she could do to help. That's when it hit me. Olivia was here to stay. She wasn't just supporting him. She was planning to be part of his life and Ethan's life, maybe even taking over the spot I'd left behind. I couldn't process it. One moment I had a family, and the next, I was on the outside looking in. I left that night. Olivia stayed. She moved in, helping with Ethan, picking up right where I'd fallen off. It felt surreal, like I was being erased from my own life. I had no husband, no son, and no sister on my side. Just nothing. After the divorce, things fell apart fast. I thought maybe Simon would be there for me, but as soon as he heard I was no longer married, he vanished. He wouldn't return my texts, barely responded to my calls, and I started to get this gut feeling that he was seeing other people. I didn't want to believe it at first, but it didn't take long to find out the truth. He'd been with 2 other women the whole time. I was just another fling, something to keep him entertained. So there I was, divorced, alone, and now dumped by the guy I'd risked everything for. I felt like a fool, like I'd thrown my life away for something that wasn't even real. It's funny, I used to think Simon made me feel seen, that he'd given me something I couldn't get at home. But in the end, he just used me and tossed me aside when I wasn't convenient anymore. Then came the job. Thomas didn't just take Ethan in the house, he went after my career too. Somehow he let my company know about the affair, about how I'd been unprofessional with a client. They didn't fire me, but they did something almost worse. They took away my main responsibilities, cut my salary, and basically shoved me into this small, insignificant role. They said I was hurting the company's reputation, and I was lucky they didn't let me go altogether. So there I was. No husband, no son, no real job. I couldn't believe how fast everything had fallen apart. I kept telling myself I'd find a way to make things right, that I'd pick up the pieces somehow. But every time I tried, something else would knock me down. Thomas agreed to let me see Ethan, but only outside the house, in a park or a coffee shop. Every time we'd meet up, I'd try to put on a happy face for Ethan, make him feel like everything was normal. But then I'd have to say goodbye, watch him walk back to the life I used to have, and it'd hit me all over again. It was like I was just a visitor in his life, not his mom. Then one day Ethan dropped a bomb that I wasn't prepared for. He told me, all casual like it was normal, that he'd seen Olivia coming out of his dad's room late at night. I froze, not really sure what to say. I didn't want to show how much it hurt, didn't want to make Ethan feel weird. But inside I was crushed. My own sister sleeping with my ex-husband, living in the house I used to call home. A few weeks later, I got an email from Thomas. They were announcing their engagement. He was marrying Olivia, my sister. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling everything I'd tried to hold on to slip through my fingers. I'd lost my husband, my son, my sister, my job. Every single part of the life I'd built was gone, taken over by people who had no problem moving on without me. And the worst part? I had no one to blame but myself. This was the mess I'd made, the consequences I'd never thought would come back to haunt me. Karma hit me like a freight train, and I couldn't pretend I didn't deserve it. I'd thrown away everything that mattered for a fling, for a stupid, selfish mistake that wasn't worth a fraction of what I'd lost. Now I'm just trying to survive, trying to pick up what little is left of my life. I keep telling myself there has to be some way forward, some way to make things right again. But honestly, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'll ever get back what I threw away. All I know is that I've got to keep going, one day at a time.